everyone, welcome to the Dyl Pickle Movie Network. I am Dylan Randazzo, and welcome to my long-anticipated ranking of all of the films I saw at New York Film Festival 62. I know the festival wrapped a few months ago. I was there for a while. I made the reviews. I put them out there, but I did promise that I would rank them. So I do want to kind of just like put this little bow on this present that was this amazing New York Film Festival, because this is a festival that means a lot to me. It's somewhere I have attended since I was a freshman in college in 2016, watching Moonlight for the first time, which went on to win Best Picture that year, and then going through the COVID era of like watching everything online, like being back in the Alice Tully Hall and watching things and trying to manage it with my regular schedule and work schedule. And this year I took on the biggest task of all, and I watched 17 movies at New York Film Festival. And I know I've reviewed them all separately on the channel, but I wanted to, as kind of a wrap up of this year of 2024, because also I'm not the type of person who makes a top 10 of 2024 the first week of January, because I still have so much shit to see that I haven't seen yet. So this is going to be my way of saying, you know what, this is my year-end ranking of the festival that I went to, where most of my favorite movies of the year came from, rather than doing this like big, long, kind of hefty, daunting task of ranking all the films I saw in 2024, or all my favorite films, because as I said, I'm still watching a lot of movies from 2024 as catch-up. I have a lot of documentaries, international films, even some ones in theaters that I haven't seen yet, like the Bob Dylan movie or The Fire Inside, movies I really want to get to. Sonic 3, which I heard is really good, that I want to see. I didn't think I'd ever be mentioning Sonic the Hedgehog in a video about New York Film Festival, but here we are. So in lieu of doing a best of the year list, I'm going to be doing a best of the fest list for the festival that dominated my latter quarter of the year of 2024. And of course, if you want to find out what my favorite movies of the year in total were, you can check out my Twitter, or you can stay tuned in a month, about a month, a little bit more than a month. I will be doing my Pickle Awards, where I will be giving my awards for every single category that I deem notable enough to give an award to. And that is not just, including the Oscar categories of sound, visual effects, and acting and screenplay, but also some superlatives: best kiss, best villain, worst film of the year. I do it all. I break it down in categories: action, comedy, musical, animated. So it's going to be a lot of fun, but that will be in a little over a month once I finally caught up on all the films of 2024 I wanted to see. But this is my ranking of all the films I saw at New York Film Festival. So 17 films, strap in. This is the most films I've ever seen at the New York Film Festival year. I really wanted to seize the opportunity, seize the moment, and really make the most of my festival experience. So here we go, kicking off the list. All of these have full reviews except for one film, which I didn't review on the channel. So most of these are going to be retreaded thoughts, but just kind of encompassing them in one grander observation of the festival at large. At number 17, the only film I would really say I would not revisit again, and it has nothing to do with anything that's problematic, any really glaring bad element, other than I was just a little bored, and that is Oh Canada, the newest film from Paul Schrader. This one stars Richard Gere, Uma Thurman, Michael Imperioli, Jacob Elordi, a lot of actors I really, really like, and they're all giving really good performances, but I think the lack of a consistent voice of narration, it is all coming from Richard Gere, but it is very much that unreliable narrator thing, and it goes back and forth between past and present, and I think it was just a little too obscure in its clarification of what the truth was versus what is the fabricated point of view of this character. I just found it hard to keep up with because of the unreliable narrator and just all of the different time jumps, all the different perspective changes, all the different leaps from, behind the camera, because it's about this documentarian trying to film Richard Gere on camera who's telling his story, but then also flashing back to Richard Gere as a younger person, as Jacob Elordi. I just found it a little inconsistent in the way it was telling the story, and I thought the story itself wasn't anything that was particularly interesting. Obviously, it deals with evading the Vietnam draft, which I thought was really interesting, but again, it didn't really dive into it as much as it dove into just him and his personality and his character relationships and just kind of his own mortality as he's facing the end of his life. I think this was a film that was very personal to Paul Schrader, and I think because of that, it didn't feel as relatable to a grander audience. Now, all these films, none of them are going to hit every single audience member evenly. There's going to be a hater of every single one of these films, but I think this one has the least capacity to appeal to the broad mainstream audience. I really just think this is a very alienating film, but it is a very personal film. So I give him a pat on the back for that, but I think of all the films, simply because I was just so bored, because I couldn't really keep up with the point of view. Yes, it was one singular point of view, but because of the unreliable narrator, I just had a very tough time staying in it and with it, especially because it did drag in its pacing. So Oh Canada would sadly come in at my number 17 at the bottom of the list. At number 16, another film I don't really think I liked, but I also at least have certain elements of it that I would go back to revisit because they are so good, is The Room Next Door. Pedro Almodovar, a filmmaker I haven't seen enough of his work of, so I just can't get a full grasp yet of him as a filmmaker. I haven't been able to really examine the trademarks and see those, thematic parallels between his works. And this is his first full-length English language feature too, so there might have been a little language barrier in a sense there as well. I just didn't vibe with this one. I think the idea is kind of interesting. A woman at the end of her life basically deciding she's going to end her life before cancer takes her and kind of having an accomplice, but then what this accomplice goes through because she's going through this moral dilemma of, do I let my friend end her life? But also, do I take away the independence of my friend who wants to make this decision about her body and her choice? I think it's a really good idea and concept. It's just when stretched to a full-length narrative, I found a lot of the beats kind of repeating themselves. Julianne Moore would wake up. She would go check to see if Tilda Swinton was alive. She'd think she was dead. Nope, Tilda Swinton's still alive. Okay, day proceeds as normal. Now they consider all the options about this potential life-ending pill. And then the end of the night comes, wakes up the next day, Julianne Moore goes and checks Tilda Swinton's room again. Like, it just felt so repetitive. And yes, maybe that is the point. Maybe it is that we live with these decisions and they kind of linger and fester in our minds and recycle over and over and over again. But I think for a full-length feature film, I think it could have taken some more interesting directions, because I think the most interesting part is, after all is said and done, how does Julianne Moore not get caught up in the legal battle of, basically aiding as an accomplice to her friend's end of life? I think that's the most interesting stuff, and it kind of rushes through it at the end. So I didn't really love this one. I think if I had seen a few more Pedro Almodovar films and could really sink into what his style is, what his actual kind of unique qualities of a filmmaker are, I can get little hints of it here, but I think when I do watch all of his films all together, I think revisiting this film, I will like it a lot more, and the performances are so good. I mean, Julianne Moore is great, Tilda Swinton is phenomenal, so I do think there are a lot of great performances that would bring me back to this film someday. Though in the grand scheme of things, with all the other films in retrospect, I think this is one of the ones that I have a little lower on the ranking because of all the things I said. At number 15, we have a film that I am surprised is this low, because it is such a big awards juggernaut this year, but it's one that I just didn't vibe with entirely, and that is Emilia Pérez. And this is a film that, going into it, I was so excited. The actors all had me very excited. Zoe Saldana, Selena Gomez, Carla Sofia Gascon, who I hadn't seen in anything, but I heard was really phenomenal in this role as a potential first transgender Best Actress nominee. I do hope that still happens because she's great, but that whole ensemble's great. I was really excited. It's a musical. It's also this really interesting story about the sex change operation and this cartel, and it's a musical, and it's a crime story. It's kind of a romance, and Zoe Saldana is the narrator, and she's a lawyer, and there's doctors, and there's some English, but it's also in Spanish. That's the thing, is it's a lot. It's almost too much, to where it's so, sensory overload. And I just think for a musical, it has this real kind of unashamed, big, bold, brash nature to it. But I also think there's something about like a slick, clean cut musical that I really prefer over something that's a little bit more shoddy. And I do also think the dialogue is a little shoddier here. The actual themes of transness, I don't necessarily know if they're handled as well as they could have been, just because it is a very nuanced conversation to have in 2024, now 2025. And I do think I think some of the overall opinions of some characters and the way the terminology is used and dead naming, I think that itself feels like it's stuck in a movie that was made decades ago. Whereas now, I think in 2024 and now 2025, I think we could expect something a little bit more progressive in its theming. But I think just the fact that you are seeing a mainstream film about a transgender person that also is a musical, that is this big crowd-pleasing hit, it does have its detractors. I am one of them, but I also think just because it exists, it is something special to talk about, and it is not a movie I will ever forget. But I do think, just when looking at all these other movies, I think the other movies are more successful in doing what they're doing than Emilia Pérez is. Was I entertained? Absolutely. I was never bored by it. If anything, I would want to rewatch this, because I think it's an easier watch than some of these other ones, because it's quick, it's fast paced, but I also think because of that, it's a little manic in a way. And I just found that it was a little all over the place in terms of its story, and both in the creative elements in bringing it visually to the screen. So yes, the acting's phenomenal. Yes, some of the songs are bangers, but I do think overall, this is not my favorite musical of the two big musicals to come out this year. The other being, of course, Wicked Part 1, which I really liked. So I do think this one is one that is not going to hold up as one of my favorites when we get to the Best Picture conversation, though I'm going to give it another watch or two before Oscar time to see if that mind changes just a little bit. Moving into number 14, we have Rumours. This is a film that was kind of pitched as this Night of the Living Dead meets Doctor Strangelove, as a political satire, but also like a zombie flick. I think it much more succeeds in the political satire realm than it does the zombie realm. I didn't find it successful as a horror film. Not saying that it needs to be scary, but also because it is this hybrid of genres, I would have liked for it to be just a little bit more inventive in its horror. I think there's some iconic images that I'm going to remember for years and years, this big brain being one of them. These, very interesting bog monsters. There are some interesting elements to it, but I think the most interesting are the comedic bits, all these different characterizations of these different political leaders on this G7, G8 summit. I forget by now. I saw this a while ago. This is one of the first films I saw at the festival, but this was a film that was a real crowd pleaser. My audience loved it. They were laughing the whole time. The only thing is I saw 13 better films. That's just simply what it is. It's not a doc on this film as much as it is a praising of those 13 other films that puts Rumours this low. But I do think it's a lot of fun. I think if you're into political satire especially, you'll really dig this. If you're looking for a really good zombie film, I don't think you're going to get that. Though I do commend them for marketing this as that horror comedy, because I do think it's going to get a lot of horror fans at least interested in it. And I don't think a lot of horror fans would have checked it out if it was just kind of pushing the political satire element of it. But I do think, the performances are so fun. Cate Blanchett's great. Charles Dance is great. Alicia Vikander, in the few minutes she's in it, is great. Another thing that I docked for it is not having enough Alicia Vikander. She's my favorite actress, but just the fact that she's in it is really special. So I definitely recommend it, but it is not one of the films that I'm like rushing back to watch again, though I do think it's more successful at its different elements than something like Emilia Pérez that just kind of throws everything at the wall and not a lot sticks. Here, it throws two big things at the wall. One kind of slides off the wall, but the other really sticks nice and sturdily, which is the political satire. So I definitely recommend Rumours, even if it's not in my top 13 on this list. As for number 13, I have a documentary. I have Elton John, Never Too Late. And the thing with Elton John, Never Too Late is that it is exactly what you expect. It's kind of Elton John's whole life story. There's some behind the scenes footage you've never seen before. There's also a lot of interesting stuff of Elton John nowadays, kind of doing his podcast and also just experiencing what it's like to be in his older years and kind of facing mortality in the end of his career. I think that's great, but I also think his story has been told so successfully in so many other areas, in books and other documentaries. Of course, Rocket Man was a great film that I don't know if I needed more Elton John in terms of just knowing all the things about him, because I already knew all those things. But, there are some really cool, bits of footage in this thing. Him with John Lennon and Yoko Ono, like that stuff was really interesting. All the stuff when he is in his present day is really interesting. And I wish they just like focused all on that, all of Elton John in his later years, in his farewell tour, because I think all the older information is stuff we've already known that's already been shown in a better light. But hey, it's Elton John, so you can't go wrong. Even if you've been seeing this information for years and years and years now, even if you're not surprised by his drug abuse, even if you're not surprised by his coming out story, like it's still Elton John, and his music is still so amazing that yeah, I enjoyed it. At number 12, we have Blitz. This is a movie that I was very surprised I didn't vibe with more. I love Steve McQueen. I love when these favorite directors of mine, like Steve McQueen, like Steven Spielberg, take on war films, because it's not a genre I love a lot. And I think, it really takes a great voice to tell a story. And honestly, I thought Steve McQueen, when it was Steve McQueen doing his Steve McQueen thing, I thought this was really successful. The conversations of race in this film are really successful. Just the idea of this black boy kind of navigating 1940s London, as this kid who is part of a mixed race family who is not very accepting of his own blackness and trying to come to terms with that while in the context of finding his mom in this war. I think all that is very successful. It's just all the other elements that I didn't vibe with. The fact that it is so chapter-esque, it's very Dickensian, it kind of flits from space to space and scene to scene to where I can never fully settle into a specific vibe, though I do think that is part of the story. It's the idea that this kid couldn't settle into a significant, grounding place. He needed to jump from the next place to the next place to the next train to the next shelter. And I do think that is part of what makes it unique and different, though I also think it takes away some of that real emotional groundedness that you get in some of his other films, because I feel like a lot of his other films really lean into the drama and really find that sense of space and really settle into it. And that's what I really love about films like, Shame and even 12 Years a Slave, which does chronicle 12 years of someone's life. I still feel like the moments that are settled into are really settled in. They're really lived in. And I think Blitz just kind of flows really fast, and just moves really quickly through a bunch of events to where by the end I just didn't feel that emotional power that I think a film like this very much could have had. It's a mother trying to get back to her son. That should be making me grab for the tissues and bawling my eyes out, but I just sadly wasn't. There was just something missing, and I think it just has to do with the idea of the story being this more, child perspective story. So everything's a little lighter, and it just kind of goes through each chapter rather quickly. It's also an Apple film, so there's a certain like glossiness and cleanness to the film that I feel like if you were to get it in a more independent lens, like it would have been a lot grittier maybe. But again, that's all things that another film would do that I think this film just wasn't setting out to do. And I think because of that, it's a little bit more mainstream, a little less appealing for me. But I also think for some people, this is going to be the film that brings them in to Steve McQueen's work, because the other films are going to be a little too raw, a little too gritty to be their cup of tea as well. So I think honestly Blitz could be something that appeals to a lot of other people. It's just for me, who has loved Steve McQueen's work time and time and time again, I didn't fully vibe with it as much as I would have liked to. And I watched this again on Christmas with my parents, and they also didn't vibe with it. So I know it's not just me. I know it's not getting a lot of awards buzz anymore. So I'm just kind of surprised that this is the story of Blitz this season, is that it just kind of goes out with a whimper. But not every film can rise to the occasion. Number 11, we have Maria. This is the Angelina Jolie biopic. It's not her biopic. It's about Maria Callas, but Angelina Jolie plays Maria Callas, and she is fantastic. I mean, Angelina Jolie is a talent like no other. The fact that she's actually singing and providing her own vocals mixed with Maria Callas's vocals, it's really impressive sound work. I was very impressed hearing about how they did all the sound for this film. The problem is, I think of all of Pablo Larraín's three main, women in 20th century pop culture, not even pop culture, but fame. These very famous women icons, Jackie Kennedy, Diana, Princess Diana, now, of course, Maria Callas. I think this is the least successful in trying to innovate the biopic genre. I think Spencer was a borderline psychological horror. I think Jackie was really dark and harrowing. Whereas I think this one is a little bit more clear-cut biopic, though it does take some, time jumps, and there is some black and white cinematography and not. Like, I do think this is still an impressively made film, but it is the most standard of the three. So I think if I were to rewatch one of his three films, it would not be Maria, but Maria's still great. And I think Pablo Larraín is one of the best at telling this type of story, this kind of tortured woman in history, a story that we think we know, but we don't know all of. And as a singer, I could definitely relate to some of it as well. So I did like it, but it just missed my top 10 because it's not one that I consistently think about, though I think the elements that I do think about are super strong. The cinematography, the sound, and of course, that Angelina Jolie performance. Kicking off the top 10, we have Queer. This is the second film this year from Luca Guadagnino. And yes, I think it's going to always be inevitable that people are going to compare this with Challengers because they both came out in the same year. But really, these films are very, very different. There are certain elements about it, especially with the eroticism, the sexiness, some of the sweaty moments, that yes, you can make that kind of A to B parallel line between those two films. And I think you could do that with all of Luca Guadagnino's films. I mean, look at Call Me By Your Name, look at Bones and All. There's a lot of, very intense sexual moments in those films. But I think Queer is such its own lane. It really does set itself apart from a lot of his other works. And I think it's because it has the least story to tell. It's just kind of this hangout vibe of this guy in Mexico City kind of trying to pursue and seduce this younger man. And I found it just heartbreaking at times, because it does linger in that kind of loneliness and that depression. But it also kind of deals in addiction, which is really fascinating. I mean, I think Daniel Craig just brings so much to his role. And I did find that as the film went on, I was just drawn more and more into this character, and less so the relationship, because I also didn't really love Drew Starkey and Daniel Craig's relationship on screen. I think it's supposed to be a little alienating for the audience, but I just found Daniel Craig's own individual arc so fascinating. And I think if he doesn't get nominated for Best Actor, it's a real disservice, because I think this is some of the most vulnerable work Daniel Craig has done. This film also takes some really interesting liberties in the third act, but I was all there for them. They were a little weird, they were a little bizarre, and I don't think I liked them as much as some of his other films pivots. Like obviously Suspiria has a big third act pivot. I think Call Me By Your Name, it kind of stays a little bit more consistent, but that ending really hits. Here, the ending was so cool and innovative and original, but like I do still think the other films of Luca Guadagnino's are going to appeal to me a little bit more with time, though it is Luca Guadagnino, and what he does so well. So I definitely think Queer is a big recommendation for me, but when comparing it to Challengers, which is just the inevitable thing to do, which is my number one film of the year, point blank period, it's very hard to look at this and not just feel like it's sitting in that shadow, which is unfortunate. And that's just what happens when you release two films in the same year that are both very good, but one is clearly better than the other. That's kind of how I feel about Jurassic Park next to Schindler's List. I know a lot of people listening to this love Jurassic Park, but I think because Steven Spielberg made Schindler's List, I just don't think you can compare the two. I think one's really fun and really well made and a real trailblazer, but one is one of the greatest dramas ever made. And I feel a little similarly here. Obviously, this is not Jurassic Park, but I do feel like this is one of those films that I'm always going to be like, wow, Luca Guadagnino did a great job with that. But you know what else he did in 2024? Challengers. And I feel like that's a disservice, but that's also just where I come from my audience bias, and having seen Challengers first, especially, just really made it hard for any film to really kind of up the ante in that sense. But I think he did a great job with this film. At number 9, we have The Friend. This is a film that's not going to come out till 2025. I guess it is 2025 now. So, yep, it's coming out this year. But this is one that I saw at the festival. Didn't know much about it other than it was about a dog. But yeah, it is a really charming dog story. If you're a dog lover, you're going to love this one. It deals with the suicide of an owner and what happens to the dog when his owner's no longer around. And it's rather sad, but it really does show that dogs can grieve too. Dogs have emotions. Dogs have feelings. And I think it's important to acknowledge that as, pet owners, yes, we are owners, but we are also their family. And I think that's a really important sentiment to make. It honestly feels like something that you wouldn't see at a film festival, because film festivals tend to be a little edgier, a little bit more artsy, whereas this one's just like a really sentimental, heartwarming story about a dog, grieving his owner with another woman who's grieving her friend who has to take care of the dog. That's why it's called The Friend. There's a lot of friends in this thing, newfound family and newfound friends, but I thought that's what was so appealing about it. It was so mesmerizing and so charming and so sweet and lovable. And I think that is what is going to appeal to so many people when they see it in 2025. So if you are not sure what this movie is, put it on your radar, because it's really, really good. At number 8, we have another Best Picture contender, maybe, but definitely a Best Director and Best Cinematography contender at this upcoming Oscars, hopefully. And it is Nickel Boys. Nickel Boys is one of those films that I've heard so many amazing things about, and I think they all kind of stem from the stylistic choices made in the film. And I do agree. I think this is a really well stylized film. This is told about two boys who were sent to this camp, and it ends up being a very, very tragic story, but everything is shown from their first person point of view. It kind of shifts back and forth between these two boys. So everything is shown as if you are looking out the camera through those characters' eyes. And I think as a technical marvel, this is a really, really successful technical film. The only thing is, because it is such a technical film, I felt like at times I was focusing on the tech of it, and I didn't feel like I could be fully immersed in the story, because I was just thinking about how did they film that? How were they approaching that scene? How were they getting that shot? But I also think there's a merit to that. I think that as a film fan, you have to look at all those little things, like especially on rewatching films. The first time you watch a film, you're kind of just soaking in everything. You're kind of just letting yourself be on for the ride and enjoying the ride. But I think, in retrospect, when you kind of go back to a film, or in this case with Nickel Boys, on a first watch, I was able to really just like hone into the craft and just think about like, oh, how did they get the lighting for this sequence? How were they able to pull off that hug? Because obviously they're hugging a camera person because the camera's right there. Like, how was it for the actors to engage with the lens? And I think for that reason, yes, it's alienating because I wasn't able to be like fully in the story and in the events of the film and in the journey of these characters. But I think it's because I was so in the technical filmmaking. I think it really is one of those films that I'm only purely looking at the technicals, but the technicals are so good that I really, really enjoy my experience with it. Would I go back to visit it time and time again? Probably not. But if I do, it's going to be because I want to kind of understand more how they pulled off what they pulled off. I mean, and there's a lot of great films. Citizen Kane being a great example of something that I don't think people always go back to watch for enjoyment of what the story is or what's going on narratively, but more so to just figure out how the hell they pulled it off in 1941 with all those amazing camera angles and camera shots and just like the presence of a ceiling in a frame when there were studios that didn't have ceilings. I mean, this is one of those films that I think years and years and decades from now, we will look back and be like, this was a technical marvel and it set the groundwork to evolve cinema. And I think that's the best type of filmmaking, though it is also the type of filmmaking that I can't really focus on anything else during. So it is a mixed bag in that sense, where I felt like half the time I was trying to, you know, kind of disregard the technical elements and try to settle into the narrative, but then something would catch my eye and something would distract me. But everything that was distracting me was worthwhile, was plentiful as a film fan, as a film history nerd, as someone who studies the ins and outs of camera lenses and goes nuts and cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs over split diopter shots and shit like that. Like, that is the type of movie making I really love. If I'm not going to be entertained by it, if I'm not going to be fully in it, I want to at least be able to appreciate what's going on. And that is what Nickel Boys is to a T. So I definitely recommend it. And I think it's going to be one that is maybe a little polarizing, but everyone's going to at least be able to talk about it because it does pull off something that is so interesting and so innovative and so unique. At number 7, we have a Brazilian drama that, thanks to the Brazilians, I mean, I've been getting so many views on that review, and I'm very grateful to you Brazilians and you Fernanda Torres fans, and that is I'm Still Here. This is a film that is very quiet, very pensive, very slice of life, but it is a beautiful film nonetheless. It's about a woman whose husband is basically taken by the government with no goodbye to his family, and they never really see him again. And it's all about her trying to get this connection back and try to get into contact with her husband, find out if her husband's even alive. But it's not just about her search for her husband, but also the brave face she has to show for her family. And I think that is where most of the drama and most of these sentimental beats hit me, was those moments where she has to kind of put on that brave face, even though she knows, and we as the audience know, that she's hurting inside. I think that is why the film is so powerful. Fernanda Torres is so good in this role, and just seeing her try to put on that brave face for her family and try to just, like, you know, contain those emotions, it is really mind-blowing work from an actress. And I think the movie itself, it kind of goes in some predictable ways and conclusions. I guess, you know, it is a historical piece of work, so, like, obviously we kind of know what happened to this father, and we know where the story ends up. But I really do like how it was very simple. It was very laid back because it just wanted to focus on these characters and these emotions, and less about this hunt to find the father and, you know, this high tense action packed narrative. It wasn't about that, and I really appreciated the way it breathed and the way it was just what it was. Number 6, I have a film that I didn't actually review here on the channel, but one that I really liked, one that was not reviewed on the channel because it's a movie that's been out since the 80s, so I didn't want to do its own separate review. But if you were on the TikTok, you definitely saw my reactions to it, and that is Hellraiser. They brought this back 4K re-release on the big screen. It was beautiful to look at. I mean, this is a 4K restoration of a film that is already so stylized, so vivid with color and really haunting use of shadow and light and just the different iconic images of these villains, these pinheads and the monsters that are created in this film, the body horror. This was just a feast for the eyes, and it was just so cool to watch it on the filmmaker's birthday as well. Get this great introduction from one of the film Lincoln Center workers who is so passionate about it, and then watching something that is so beloved, not just by the horror community, but especially the queer horror community, because of all its queer undertones as well. And I have a lot of friends in that community that I'm very grateful to kind of rep. And I just thought this was such a cool experience, just getting to see Hellraiser for the first time ever. I'd never seen it before on the big screen with such vivid 4K restoration. It was just a match made in heaven for this festival. At number 5, I have Hard Truths. This is a film made by Mike Leigh, a film that as soon as it ended, I went, that's it. And then 10 seconds after that, I went, that's it. You know, it's one of the quickest, immediate out of theater reactions I've ever had. So much so that by the time the Q&A started, I had already loved this film. But it really does show that a film can instantly make you feel one thing and then immediately turn you around and feel another. And I love the power of this film because of that, because Mike Leigh famously doesn't plan out his films ahead of time. He lets the kind of circumstances evolve naturally with the characters. You know, he does cast his characters, he creates the backstories for his characters with his actors and actresses, but he doesn't know exactly where the film is going to go. And I think that's really cool. The idea that you're just kind of watching it play out like real life. And then when Mike Leigh says, you know what, this feels like the right ending place, that's where it ends. I mean, it's one of the coolest filmmaking exercises, and he does this with a lot of his films. And I think it really is a testament to how good he is with his actors that he's able to pull it off so successfully. Because I think Marianne Jean-Baptiste is maybe the performance of the year. I mean, she is giving work here that is just so unbelievably raw and vulnerable and angsty and fiery and passionate, but also so broken inside. You know, it's a performance that has so many layers underneath this very volcanic surface of this human being that I just found so mesmerizing. So if you have a chance to check out Hard Truths, don't expect a full beginning, middle, end. Just expect a slice of life in this very fascinating character drama. And I think think you're going to really enjoy it. But number 4, now going for the complete opposite of this short, quaint slice of life feature to one that is big, it's bold, it's long, it's got an intermission, it's bombastic, it's going to get so many Oscar nominations, and that is The Brutalist, which is one of the biggest films of the year. And like its title suggests, it is a brutal watch, but in the best way. It's one of those dramas that just immediately makes you think of the great drama epics of our time. Godfather, There Will Be Blood. Movies that I think are way better than The Brutalist, but also movies that definitely feel like they're cut from the same cloth. In the fact that they are telling these big, sweeping American stories about what it means to be American in a dark way, showing this American dream, showing this immigration story in a very raw and brutal way, as the title suggests of this film. But I thought this was fantastic. I think Adrian Brody really anchors this film so successfully, but all the supporting characters around him, Alessandro Nivola in the first act, Guy Pearce in the second act, Felicity Jones in the entire second half of the film, they really bring a lot of texture and a lot of quality to this film that is already anchored by so much greatness from Adrian Brody, but the performances really bring it together alongside the production design. This is all about an architect trying to start a new life in America after fleeing the Holocaust, and how he ends up growing into this sensation of an architect only to see his whole life kind of start crumbling down before him as he's rising up in his fame, in his profession. And I think it's just one of those fascinating stories that I could have sat for another 6 hours watching, because I'm just so engrossed in these characters and in the beautiful sets that Brady Corbet and the entire production team were able to pull off with such a little budget as well. I mean, this is a movie that was not made for a lot of money, but feels like it was made for a shoot ton of money, because there's just so much. There's so many big, expansive buildings that this character is creating. There's so many costumes. This movie's long, and it was shot on film. So I'm thinking, like, how much reel and how much film were they supposed to use, for their budget? And they made every single dollar count. And it shows you don't need a big budget to produce something big and monumental and epic. And I think that is why The Brutalist is going to go down as one of the year's best films. At number 3, a movie that is also probably not coming out till next year, or this year, I should say, because I haven't really seen it anywhere else since I saw it at New York Film Fest, but it is one that when it is available, I'm going to make sure everyone watches, which is Alex Ross Perry's Pavements. This is a biopic about the band Pavement. What is so fascinating about this film is it's not a biopic. It's a fake biopic parodying the standard musical biopics, like maybe the ones that are in theaters right now, like A Complete Unknown, but kind of taking that kind of base template biopic and kind of making a parody of it, while also being a documentary about the band Pavement, but also being a behind-the-scenes documentary about making the fake biopic, starring Joe Keery as himself, who gives a fantastic performance, while also being a museum piece, because there's a lot of footage from a museum that they made about Pavement. And then, if Alex Ross Perry hadn't just stopped there, he decided, I'm going to push myself even further, and decided to stage an off-Broadway production jukebox musical using the music of the band Pavement to weave in and out of this multifaceted story. I mean, this is a documentary, I guess. It's a biopic, I guess. It's an off-Broadway musical, I guess. Yes, it's all those things, and it is so much more than just those things. It is something that is just a feat in filmmaking. It'll change forever how we view musical biopics, because I think for so many years now, we've been getting the same types of movies since really the 80s. I mean, look at Coal Miner's Daughter in 1980, kind of setting the groundwork for what these musical biopics are. And they're really great star vehicles. There's some really great performances that come from musical biopics. But in the end of the day, you can find a lot of similarities. Like, the movie about Ray Charles should not feel the same as the movie about Johnny Cash, should not feel the same as the movie about Freddie Mercury, yet they all feel like they are using the same exact template. There are some exceptions, like Rocket Man, that kind of take this idea and really create something whimsical and imaginative with the concept. But for the most part, a lot of music biopics are the same thing. And there's a comfort to that. A lot of people like that, but also some people want to see the filmmaking evolve. And this is exactly what Pavements is doing, and Alex Ross Perry is doing with this film. He's taking so many different types of movies and kind of creating one big Frankenstein's monster with them all, yet pulling them all off so well. There's not a single element of the film that's weaker than the rest. The only thing that was alienating for me is that I didn't know anything about Pavement going in, but I also feel like this is such a successful biopic, because leaving this film, I think I understand Pavement fully through and through. And it's the same thing I felt about Rocket Man when I left it. I knew who Elton John was through and through. When I left, a few other biopics, like when I left Bohemian Rhapsody, I didn't feel like that was a honest depiction of who Freddie Mercury was. It didn't feel like it embodied the spirit of Freddie Mercury. Here, it feels like it embodies the band, and I don't even know the band. And I think that's a real testament to how good this film is. So when it comes around to you, please seek it out. I do think it's going to change how musical biopics are made forever now, because I think it just showed how much you can do with something that is so stale and so rigid and so stagnant. So yeah, big fan of this one. At number 2, I've been toying back and forth, what I want to make my number 1 of this festival ranking. And I'm going to do something a little bit unpredictable, because there is a film that I think is probably the best film I saw at the fest, but I do want to rep my other film more because of the surprise element of it. So I'm going to do something a little unpredictable. At number 2, I'm going to put Anora. And Anora is a movie I feel like I don't have to talk more about, because so many people have said so many amazing, brilliant things about it. It is a fantastic film. It kind of normalizes sex work culture in a very fascinating, honest, and respectful way. It has a fantastic cast, not just Mikey Madison, who is doing the Lord's work. She is just fantastic. She is unlike anything I've ever seen from any actress ever. She is phenomenal, but also Yura Borisov, Mark Edelstein, Karen Caliglian. I can't even pronounce his last name, but that cast is so good. It's funny, it's lovable, it's playful, it kind of gets deep and serious, especially at the end. The ending is phenomenal. Everything about it, it's shot so well. The studying of the Brooklyn accents and the Brighton Beach, ways of inflections of that Brooklyn accent. I think every single element of this film is perfect, pitch perfect, and I loved it so much. No notes, it's a perfect film. But at number 1, I'm going to put a film that I just found to be such a surprise. It's a film that was like 3 hours long that I was like, I don't want to have to suffer through 3 hours of this drama. It's a war drama. It's going to make me sad. It looks a little boring. It looks a little lethargic. All right, I'll watch it. And then I realized it was at 9 p.m. I was like, oh God, am I going to be up till midnight watching this film? And then as soon as the film ended, I went, that is life-changing. And that is Mohamed Rosalov's The Seed of the Sacred Fig. This is a movie that, like I said, I went into thinking this was just going to be a long 3-hour drama, and I wasn't going to be as involved and engrossed with it and captivated by it. But by the end, I was like, this is a classic. It's a classic in the making. And I feel the same way about Anora. I feel the same way about Pavements. I feel the same way about The Brutalist. Like, these top 4 are all films that I think will change film in some way, shape, or form. And I think The Seed of the Sacred Fig has the most stakes in doing so. Like, The Brutalist, obviously, telling an immigrant story, being this long 3-hour VistaVision film, is important. It's impactful. Pavements, the way it's going to change musical biopic filmmaking, of course. Anora, the fact that it is this very bold but very crowd-pleasing film about something that is so taboo, yet everyone seems to be falling in love with it, is amazing. But this film has real, honest, personal stakes. This filmmaker had to make this film in hiding because his government is so hostile that he has to, literally fear for his life every time he brings his camera out on the streets, because he's trying to film something that is not allowed to be portrayed on film in his country because it is showing the government in a bad light. But the truth of the matter is, what they are going through is so harrowing and so haunting that he feels like he owes it as his gift as a filmmaker to portray these things on camera, even if it means risking his life. And now the director had to flee the country. He had to go into hiding. He literally had to send his reel to Germany to get it edited by a guy who didn't even speak Persian. So this guy in Germany has to edit together all this footage from this Persian film, not knowing what the language is, but just kind of going off of some base notes. And the fact that Germany is submitting it for the Academy Awards, I really hope it gets nominated. It has to. I don't see a world where it doesn't. And if it doesn't, I'm going to be very, very pissed off. But this is one of those films that I feel like just has such real consequences. I mean, this is a film where the people who made it were quite literally putting themselves in life's danger, in risk, to make a film to highlight just how much atrocities there are in the place they live, but also understanding that it is also a film and it is also entertaining. It's also gripping. It's suspenseful. It's about this family who is undergoing this really terrible, political climate, but their father works for the government, and you start to see how that disconnect between the women in the household and the father really starts to separate, and you start to see this, collision and this divide, and you start to see how their interests just get further and further and further and further apart, to where it ends up becoming this Shining-esque hunt at the end, where this father is literally, trying to potentially put his kids in danger because he is trying to do what's right for his country and his job because of the cowardice of him as a person, but also understanding that that is the political climate. That is what makes these families have this tension. And it really just goes to show that, the way the world operates can seep into our households, can kind of get under the cracks, not just of the house of that we live in, but our skin. It can get in between these relationships, these bonds, these lifelong unconditional loves can be tempered and harmed because of what's going on in our political climate. We see it now in the United States as well. The idea that, there's such political divide, and it really does divide a family. It could divide a family. We see it all around the world. No matter where you are, no matter what spectrum you fall on, the real world does find its way to get into our familyhood and our families and our livelihoods, and really just chips away at us and eats at us. And I think that's what this film is doing. It's showing how this family can be so, succumbed by this terrible, terrible atrocity going on in their country. So much so that the filmmaker himself is trying to go out of his way to, go through this very harmful circumstance to get this footage, to make a statement, to make a film, and to just provide something that is 3 hours of just pure suspense and beautiful filmmaking. This is a film that I just was so taken aback by. And yes, I do think Anora at the end of the day would be the one that I would say, like, this is the best film of the year. But I think for this ranking and for the idea of going into the festival blind to this film, not knowing what this film was about, only knowing that the director had fled his country to come to the New York Film Festival, what does this mean? And then just see this film and then hear the story and just see how much it reflects the society we live in today. I was just so taken aback by it. It was so, so beautiful. And yes, it is a film that is going to be controversial because I think it also does bring up some interesting, talking points about the Middle East. But I also think it's one of those films that at its core is just about a family trying to navigate war times. And if it is that simple, if you don't take into context all the different little webs and strings around it, I think it just works on its own very powerfully. But then when you start to bring in all the context of the world and your own position and your own thoughts and your own viewpoints, I think it only enriches the experience. So yes, I would say The Seed of the Sacred Fig is my best of the fest for New York Film Festival 62. So there's my ranking. I know I rambled a lot. I know I said a lot of ums and buts and having to restate my sentences because there is a lot of great films to talk about and a lot of words that I wanted to say. And guess what? I do this without notes. I have my notes right here. I just write the ranking down and I have to kind of just do it off the top of my head. So that's a little insight into my perspective. But as you could see with a lot of these films, I was at a loss for words because I just truly think this was one of the greatest lineups I've ever seen at New York Film Fest. And I can't wait to see what it brings in the future years to come. But that was my ranking, my best of the fest. Let me know if you've seen any of those films or if any of those films you hadn't heard about that I put on your radar. And stay tuned because later today, we are going to transition into 2025 and I'm going to give you my most anticipated films of 2025. It's one of my favorite videos to make every year and I can't wait for you to see that as well. But this was a perfect way to cap the year that was 2024 by talking about some of the best and worst of that year. But stay tuned because those Pickle Awards are coming where I will be doing my full assessment of all the things that I loved throughout the year, the performances, the screenplays, the pictures and films that I love the most, and all of the text in between and superlatives. So thank you so much for watching this video. Please like, subscribe, continue to comment, continue to share with your friends if you like this channel, if you want to support us. We have a lot of interesting stuff coming for 2025 and some big changes coming to the channel, which I will address very soon. But thank you so much for watching and stay tuned for more. Thanks.